We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Beis in Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 117b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara asked, we know that a mother-in-law might potentially hate her daughter-in-law, and therefore we don't believe her when she says that her daughter-in-law's husband died. But the question is, what would be by a potential future mother-in-law? In other words, let's say you have a woman who might become her mother-in-law should this girl's husband die, and she goes ahead and she does Yivam and she marries her brother-in-law, then the mother of that brother-in-law, so that's a potential future mother-in-law, do we believe her or not? So the Gemara says, Tashma, come in here, the following proof. Amra meis bali, let's say a woman says that my husband died, and after that my father-in-law died. So the halacha is tinase v'titol ksuba, she's allowed to remarry and she can take her ksuba because she's believed about her husband. V'chamosa asura, however, her mother-in-law is still prohibited because she's not believed regarding her father-in-law, she's only believed regarding her husband. And so the Gemara says, "My time a chamosa asura." What is the reason why in this case her mother-in-law is prohibited and we don't believe her in terms of when she testifies that her mother-in-law's husband died? Lav mishum damrin, isn't it because we say really what happened was lo bala mayis v'lo chamia mayis? Her husband never died and her father-in-law never died. And the only reason why she's saying this is she's trying to mess up her mother-in-law. Savra, she thinks, that in the future, at some future point in time, she won't be able to come and she won't be able to bother me. In other words, she's thinking to herself, the husbands will return, and it's going to turn out that she ended up prohibiting herself to her husband, and therefore she's not going to be my mother-in-law anymore. So therefore she's thinking ahead to this situation. And the Gemara is assuming, so therefore since you see that the woman is thinking ahead and that's why we don't believe her, so the same thing should be true by a potential future mother-in-law. We should say that she's thinking ahead to a certain situation, and therefore maybe she is lying, we don't believe her. But the Gemara says it's not a proof at all. Dilma maybe shani hasam, it's different over there. The rugish latzara, because she already has pain from this woman. In other words, over here where she's talking about her father-in-law dying and she's thinking in the future this is going to benefit her, that's fine. She's thinking something in the future, but that's concerning her mother-in-law, who right now she doesn't like her mother-in-law, so she's thinking into the future. But that's not necessarily true by a situation of a potential future mother-in-law. The person is not thinking maybe one day I'm going to be her mother-in-law, and therefore this is no proof to that question. And Rashi over here explains, Amra meis bali v'yachagach meis chami. Again, she says my husband died, and then she says my father-in-law died. Ribusa ashmin, and this is really a chiddush that it's teaching us. The avagav de Amra bereisha meis bali, even though she's really originally saying my husband died, v'nimsa shein zuchamos, it turns out this lady's not even her mother-in-law anymore, according to her testimony. V'arei lo kenachris, so she's really like her, like an unrelated person. Afilu achi lo mehemna, but she's still not believed. The Amra meis chami, when she says that my father-in-law died, v'chamos asur, and her mother-in-law is still prohibited. My time, what's the reason? Halav chamosi, it's not even really her mother-in-law. El mishum da'amri hach lav ba'alamayis. The real reason must be because we say really her husband didn't die. V'adayin zu chamos, and this is really still her mother-in-law. V'lo chamel mayis, and also her father-in-law never died. V'zu kalasa miskavna lekilkala, and really it's all just the intention of the daughter-in-law to mess up her mother-in-law. V'yavagav dahashta hare beno shel zu b'medinas hayam ve'ein imo etzlo ledaberlo. Now, even though in this particular case her son is b'medinas hayam, and the reason to hate her doesn't even exist, the whole reason why they hate each other, it's because she tells her son everything. But that's not true. He's not even around to speak to her son bad things about her daughter-in-law. Nevertheless, still she's thinking into the future to try to mess her up right now. Because she's thinking when my husband and when her husband come back, then this is going to be a way to push her off. So that's why the Gemara says the same should be true by a potential future mother-in-law. That's also a kind of thinking into the future. And the Gemara said, no, you can't bring a proof. Here in this case, the daughter-in-law has already been annoyed by her mother-in-law. It's like an older hatred. She already has a hatred. But by a potential future mother-in-law, she was never her mother-in-law. They never had a bad relationship. Lo tifsha, you can't answer to that particular case. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Eid Omer Meis. Let's say you have a situation where one aid says that her husband died, Benissus, and she remarries based on the testimony of this aid. Now another aid comes in and says he didn't die, so Harezu Lo Teitze, so she doesn't need to leave her new husband on the basis of this one aid. Eid Omer Meis, let's say again, one aid says that her husband died. Ushnayim omrim lo meis. Now 2 Eidim come in and say that he really didn't die. Aval pisha nisas, even though she did already remarry on the basis of the 1 Eid, Teitze, she has to leave that second husband because there are 2 Eidim that are saying this is a prohibited relationship. Shnayim omer meis. Now let's say 2 people testified that her husband died. Ve'eid omer lo meis, and then 1 Eid comes and says no, he did not die. Afal pisha lo nisas, even though she did not yet remarry, tinase, she is still allowed to remarry. We do not need to worry about the testimony of the 1 Eid. And the Gemara says, Taima denisas, the only reason why in the first case of the Mishnah that she's allowed to remain remarried is because she already remarried. In other words, in a situation where you have 1 Eid that says that the husband died, and she gets remarried, and then another Eid comes and says he doesn't die, so there she's allowed to stay married because she already got remarried. Halonis, but in such a case of 1 against 1, if she did not yet remarry, lo tinase, apparently she's not allowed to marry on the basis of the 1 Eid because it's 1 against 1. But that doesn't make any sense, the Gemara says. V'yamar Ula, but didn't Ula say, Kol makom shemina Torah Eid echad, anytime the Torah believes 1 Eid, harei kan shnayim, that 1 Eid is considered like 2 Eidim. V'yein devar shel echad b'makom shnayim, so if you have 1 against 2, that should be nothing. In other words, if you have a case where 1 Eid says that he died, and we believe that Eid, because again, we're lenient because of situations of Iguna, so that Eid is considered like 2. And so then if another Eid comes in and says he didn't die, so she should still be completely permitted even if she didn't yet get remarried. And so the Gemara says, you're right. Hachi Kamer, here's really what the Mishnah means. Eid echad omer meis, if 1 Eid says he dies, he died, v'hi tiru ali nasi, and we allowed her on that basis to remarry. Uba echad v'yamar lo meis, and then another Eid came in and said, no, he did not die. Lo teitze mehetera harishon, so she does not leave her original heter, and she actually is allowed to get remarried on the basis of the testimony of that first Eid. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, Eid omer meis, if 1 Eid says that the husband died, and then 2 Eidim say that the husband did not die, so then we have to follow the 2 Eidim. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that should be obvious also. Dein dvarav shel echad b'makom shnayim. You're not going to take the testimony of 1 against 2. Obviously, the 2 are going to overrule the 1. And so the Gemara answers, Lo no tzricha, the mission is needed, bifsula yedus. The ones that came in, those 2 that came in, they're actually normally disqualified. And it's a situation over here where we're believing them, but they're really, in typical situations, they would be considered disqualified witnesses. And over here already, that's a chiddush, because we're saying that the 2 who are disqualified, they override that first testimony of the 1. Uchad Reb Nechemia, and it follows what Reb Nechemia taught. The Tanyas we learned in a Brisa, Reb Nechemia says, Kol makom she'emina Torah eid echad. Anytime the Torah believed 1 witness, halach acharov deos, you still follow the majority of the opinions. V'yasu shtei noshim b'ish echad kishnei anoshim b'ish echad. So let's say you have a situation of 2 women against 1 man. That's the same thing as 2 men against 1 man, which is exactly our case over here. You had a situation where 1 qualified witness came in and said that he died, and then you have 2 witnesses who are normally disqualified and say that he did not die. Those 2, let's say in this case, 2 women against the 1 man, the 2 women are going to be the ones that we follow because we follow the majority opinion. V'boy is saying, but the Gemara says, if you want, I could say it in a slightly different fashion. Actually, if you had a case where the 1 Eid that came at first and said that he died was an Eid echad kosher, was a qualified witness, so then afilu mei anoshim keid echad damyan. Then, even if 100 women would come after, they would not overrule the 1 Eid. They would only have the status of 1 Eid. Ella Kagon, but rather over here the case is as follows. In our Mishnah, the case is as follows. Kagon da'asoi isha meikara. The case is that 1 woman came first. V'tirtzal Reb Nechemia hachi. And according to this, we'll understand Reb Nechemia as follows. Reb Nechemia says, Kol makom shemina Torah eid echad. Anytime the Torah believes 1 witness, halach acharov deos, we follow the majority. V'yasu shtei noshim bi'isha achas. And we consider, let's say it's 2 women against 1 woman, kishnei anoshim bi'isha echad, like 2 men against 1 man. In other words, according to this version, 2 women would override the 1 woman. But if you would have 2 women against 1 man, that would be actually a different halacha. That would be kapalgo palgodami. That would be like 50-50. They would essentially cancel each other out. And Rashi over here explains, according to the second answer, if the first Eid that came was a qualified witness, and we allowed her based on his testimony, so then when when 100 women would come in, they would only have the status of one. So what do we say in that case? When it's 1 against 1, the first one actually wins because he's considered like 2 in terms of allowing her to remarry that the husband died. So if 100 women also, there's going to be like one witness. It's going to be like 1 against 1. And again, that first one who said the husband died, he is going to win. So therefore, that's not the case the Mishnah is talking about, where she has to divorce. When our Mishnah said that if 2 witnesses come in, she has to leave that second husband, that's specifically, again, when a woman was the one who was the 1A that testified that she could remarry, and she remarried based on her testimony. And the Mishnah is saying, she has to leave that second husband based on the testimony of the 2 women that came after. We don't say that first woman is considered like a qualified witness and is like 2. Even though we did consider her like 2 to allow this woman to remarry, but she's not considered like 2 in the face of 2 women who come after. Kapalgo, again, the Gemara used the language of, it's like if you have a situation of shtei noshim bi'ish echad, that's like 50-50, meaning to say, like we said, bi'ed echad omer meis v'tiru linas. If you had 1A that said he died and she was allowed to remarry, u'ba'acher v'yomar lo meis, then another one came and said that he did not die, there we say that she doesn't have to leave her original heter, the heter still exists. And the Gemara continues that the 2 dots, the Mishnah said, shnayim omrim meis v'chulu, let's say you have the reverse case, 2 of them say that the husband died, and then one of them says he did not die, so then again, she is allowed to remarry. The Gemara says, Maika Mashmalan, what exactly is the Chiddush over here? This also seems very obvious. So the Gemara says, so you're going to say that we're talking here also the 2 are actually disqualified in general, normally disqualified witnesses, and we're following Rav Nechemia, Da'azal Basar Rov Deos, who says you follow the majority of the opinions, and therefore we follow the 2 over the 1, even though the 2 are Psulei Edus. But the Gemara says, Hainu Hach, but that's exactly the same as the line previously. We just explained the previous line in the exact same fashion. So why would the Mishnah be teaching us the same thing twice? The Gemara says, no, it is a chiddush. Because what might you have thought? When we said before that we follow the majority, that was to be strict on the woman. We say, let's say the majority are saying she cannot remarry, so we follow that majority. But let's say you have the majority saying she can remarry, and that's a leniency. Maybe we would not follow the majority. Kamash Malon. That's what we're coming to teach us here, that no, in a situation where you're following Rov Deos, that even works lakula. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Achas omeres meis, v'achas omeres lo meis. Let's say a person has 2 wives, and one of them said that the husband died, and the other one says he didn't die. So Zusho Meres Meis, the woman who says that the husband died, Tinase, she's allowed to remarry on the basis of her own testimony. V'titol Ksubas, and she can collect her Ksuba. V'Zusho Meres Lo Meis, and the woman who says that he did not die, Lo Tinase, she cannot remarry, V'lo Titol Ksubasa, and she's not allowed to take her Ksuba. Achas omeres meis v'achas omeres nereg. Now let's say again there's 2 wives. One of them says he died, and one of them says he was killed. Rabbi Meir says, Hoel umachisho zu ezu, since they're contradicting one another, so hareyelu lo yinasu, so therefore they're not allowed to remarry. Now Rashi over here says, Hoel vein machisho, so the Gemara will ask, Liflug nami Rabbi Meir bereisha. According to that logic, Rabbi Meir should argue on the first case of the Mishnah, to zusho meres meis lo tinase. In the case where you have one says he died and one says he didn't die, they're also contradicting each other, so she shouldn't be allowed to remarry even the one that said that he died. That's going to be a question of the Gemara, but in any case, Rabbi Meir is saying, since in this case one says he died, one says he was killed, and that's a contradiction, so the halach is, Hareyelu lo yinasu, again, they're not allowed to remarry. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say, Hoel v'zu modo, since they both admit she'ein kayim, that he's no longer alive, yinasu, they are allowed to remarry. Rashi over here says, Hoel v'zu modos ha'achas modev ha'achas eina moda lo yinasu shteyen elo ha'achas. So if the situation would be where one would admit and one would not admit, so then they can't both remarry. Only one of them is allowed to remarry. But in this case, we're saying that since both of them admit it, so therefore they're they're both allowed to remarry. And the Mishnah continues, Eid Omer Meis v'Eid Omer Lo Meis. Let's say you have a case where one aid says he died, and one aid says he did not die. In this case, on the basis of the one that said he died, the Bezdin did not yet allow her to remarry. In other words, you had a situation where one aid came in and said he died, and then before there was even a heter for her to remarry, another aid came in and said that he did not die, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Yud Ches Amud Aleph.